Welcome everyone to this sort of like a mini workshop on trauma, the invisible wounds in suicide risk. It's going to be facilitated by Dr. Havovi Bhagwagar and me, Aditi. So let me introduce Havovi first. Havovi is a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist with over 25 years of experience in trauma, recovery, and mental health care. She is the founder of Manashni in Mumbai and holds a PhD in social sciences from Tata Institute of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. and her work focuses on complex trauma, dissociative disorders, and personality and mood conditions, and using EMDR, paths work, and attachment-based approaches. She also trains and supervises mental health professionals across India and serves as a faculty for TISs. No, okay, sorry. I have to read this. Faculty for International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, ISSTD. And we is also a supervisor for the trauma focused therapy in TISs. She is a founding board member of Mental Health Support Foundation, which promotes inclusive, community-based mental health care. Her academic contributions include research on secondary traumatic stress among Indian psychotherapists. That's a recent PhD on. And her work has been featured in peer-reviewed journals, national conferences, and mainstream media. Do look her up. Lots of resources and that she has. So now coming to me. Aditi, PhD, is a counseling psychologist in Pune, involved in education, prevention, intervention, and post-pension work in the field of mental health. She has contributed particularly to empowering mental health workers in suicide prevention and survivor support, psychosocial support after disasters, addressing pandemic crisis, and trauma healing. She's a fellow, faculty, and board member of the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. That's it. So, thank you all and welcome everyone. So,
welcome everyone.
Yeah, it's on.
Bas, I just want to see.
Okay, fine. So keep this here. Yeah. So it's been condense everything into a 2-hour and now a little less than 2-hour workshop here. So, let's go. Yeah. So, keeping in context the theme of what are we missing, attempting to look at the hidden wounds behind suicide risk. Yeah. And using the trauma lens. So, if we ask how many of your clients or even people that you know carry trauma the world doesn't see. So what could be some of those hidden things? Sorry, let's pause. It's okay. This session's being recorded. So, and as I ask something, response from you, if you would like to respond but not be recorded, I will request the camera person to keep the focus on us. So, हमेशा हमारे तरह ही camera रखिए. And if your voice also, if you don't want to be recorded, please indicate and I'll indicate to him to pause. Yeah, is that okay? Is that okay with everyone? Yeah. Okay. Just setting a little bit of safety for us. Okay. Yeah. So, what could be some of these hidden wounds, invisible trauma. Go ahead, shout out. Sexual, sexual violations or some. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Neglect. Sometime. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Verbal and physical abuse. Yeah. Yeah. One second. गिल गलती हो गई है और गिल्ट हो रहा. Yeah. Thank you. Witnessing any tragedy. Yes. Broken families. Yes. And someone here wanted to say.
Having a parent who has a mental disability which was diagnosed way later, so their childhood they didn't have the understanding of that.
Yeah, so parents with a mental health condition but not diagnosed early enough, and the child, as the child was growing, it was not known. Yeah.
Loneliness inside.
Loneliness inside. Yeah, right. Thank you.
Trauma also something which that person is not really affected, but something that person watch or listen.
Okay. Not
Like
directly.
Like accident or
Yeah.
someone is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, including somebody's suicide attempt or action. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your responses. So many of these, as you point out, are hidden. Yes.
Trauma due to natural disasters be
Yeah. So trauma due to natural disasters, some of it might be visible, but there could also be invisible wounds.
Just along the lines of what someone said, sexual traumas in women, perhaps, but I think more so in men, traumas that are not openly, seem to get not been acknowledged that are
Yes. So not just sexual trauma, not just in women, but everyone. Yeah. Thank you. And can't be acknowledged. That's something important. Neglect came up. This internal guilt came up. So sometimes it's not. I mean, it could be a repercussion of something that happened inside, but then happened outside, but there's a repeat of it inside. So, is the sound okay? I'm hearing sound. Okay. Yeah. So the topic is, how do we connect these to suicide risk? Okay. Now, trauma as a word itself has evolved. Originally, ISTSS has said that shocking, emotionally overwhelming events involving actual or threatened death or serious injury. This might have been sort of put together here by ISSTS, but it's again evolved over time. And 23 WHO said that trauma can be direct or indirect. Most individuals recover naturally, though some may develop chronic conditions. So, yeah. And NIH saying stressors experienced directly or indirectly producing severe neurophysiological emotional responses. So it is no longer like an event that has happened outside, but it has an impact inside. Okay? So neuro means the biology is affected, and emotional responses. We'll see these in a little more detail later. One second, the last one. Okay. And Samsa, who has also done a lot of work related to substance abuse, says that series of events or circumstances experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening with lasting adverse effects on functioning and well-being. Okay? So I want you to notice a shift. So initially it was actual or threatened death or serious injury. Now it's coming to emotionally harmful also. And it's not just one or so event, but series of events. Yeah. So trauma sort of, the definition is sort of broadened. And yeah, right. These are the different types, again, evolved over time. Originally, single incident trauma, Then type 2, chronic interpersonal trauma. So imagine a child growing up being put down by a parent, a sibling, maybe a bully in school. So many such experiences. So that would be type 2, which the addressing of which might need something different than addressing a single incident such as accident or even a natural disaster kind of trauma. Then intergenerational, we heard this being talked about earlier in the morning. It can be from many generations down. And trauma that affects the culture, the community, and eventually coming into our individual space as well. Partition trauma, caste-based trauma, and race-related ones when we look at it. And then the last one, Havavi is an expert in this, about vicarious or systemic trauma. So especially as mental health workers, when you work with somebody who has gone through trauma, what are we experiencing as we witness and hear about things day after day, hour after hour?
So I'll just do a sound check. Am I audible at the back? Yeah. So thank you, Aditi. That was just an introduction to what trauma is about, because I'm sure we have a heterogeneous group here. Some of you may have read about and heard about trauma in depth, and some of you may be hearing about it, maybe read or even seen Instagram reels on it, and have some information. So we wanted to give you a more maybe scientific, academic, and a little more localized view of how trauma looks in clinical practice also. So that was the intention of that first half. But our goal today is not just to talk about trauma, but also to link it to suicide. So in the upcoming sections, we are also going to talk not just about trauma, but its relation to childhood adversity, how that links to suicide, what does research show. And we've also added one interesting section for all of you, which will come in the middle of the presentation, which is rarely talked about. That is how trauma shows up in clinical conditions. OCD, for example, bipolar, for example, and leads to suicide risk, but again is not really discussed much, either in research. It is being in the last 5 years, but it is still an upcoming topic. So we thought a little about that, and then we'll move on to the last section, which will be about a trauma-informed suicide risk response. When we do a suicide response, how do we do it through a trauma lens? So that will cover the whole presentation. Now, like Aditi said, there is type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 trauma. That originated from the work of Lenore Terre, who was a child psychiatrist, and she discovered that single incident. So she studied a bunch of children who were in a really horrible bus accident. Not even an accident, it was a kidnapping. And the children were trapped under the bus or trapped in the bus with the driver for several hours. This was a group of kids that had gone through a single incident trauma, and she studied their responses to intervention. And she found that this group responded to intervention well, despite having such a horrific incident happen to them, because they came from fairly safe homes. They came from fairly compact, you can say intact families, which did not have that much of traumatic experience. She then compared them to a group of other children who grew up in orphanages or grew up in homes of violence, or grew up without the support of parents or with parents with mental illness. And back in the 70s, she discovered that the first group, which is type 1, exposed to a single incident, will typically have a faster recovery rate. Type 2, which is more exposed to what we might not call as stark events that come in the newspaper and headlines and all of that. These are all behind hidden doors, but these lead to more deeper wounds. So this was back in the 70s. But the entire concept of suicide and childhood trauma is not something which we have discovered in the 80s or 90s. It existed back in the time of Freud and Charcot. Okay? I don't know how many of you know that back in the time of Freud, that's when he first discovered that there was something called childhood trauma. He wrote a paper on it. That paper he had to retract because there was so much public pressure. The people in those wealthy families did not want childhood trauma to come out in the public and be known. It's not like it was not happening. It's been happening since the beginning of humanity, but these things were kind of put away from human consciousness. And as Judith Herman says, childhood trauma has gone through periods of amnesia. We think about it and then we forget it. Then it lies buried. And this was until finally one study emerged that kind of silenced everyone and provided statistical evidence that childhood trauma exists and is very strongly linked to not just suicide, but every form of mental and physical health issues. You all know what I'm talking about, right? The Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Let's start with prior to the ACEs study, what happened. This is a small story very few people know about. We'll talk about how the Adverse Childhood Experiences study was born. So all of you are aware about Dr. Vincent Felitti. He is a physician. He used to work in, he ran a weight loss clinic in San Diego. And it was a very successful program. Okay, a lot of women especially were losing weight in that program. It was an obesity clinic. And he found something confusing. He found that the women who lost the maximum weight were the ones who were dropping out of the program. So he said, why is this happening? And he recalled the women one by one and did their interview. And quite by chance, he asked a question to one of the women, how much did you weigh when you first became sexually active? And she said she weighed 18 kilos and her first sexual experience was with her father. And that's when it struck him that God knows how many such histories are not known or spoken about. And another thought that struck him is, could obesity be a solution, not a problem? Could that person want to hang on to their weight because it made them feel safe? It made them feel protected. And so when he went back and interviewed the other women who had dropped out of the program, some 280 of them, similar stories emerged over and over and over. Sexual abuse, child abuse of some nature or the other was in all their histories. A lot of them had sexual abuse. Now the funny part is the same amnesia from the time of Freud he faced. He went to public lectures, he took his research findings and asked for funding and sponsorship. He didn't get it. His colleagues said, I don't think, no, childhood trauma doesn't exist. But he kept talking about his paper, and finally he met Dr. Robert Anda from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and he was the first person to show interest. And he said, let us do a long-term study and a large-scale study on this issue and see whether we are finding anything. So that's where the Adverse Childhood Experiences study was born, where they prepared these 10 questions. There were 17,000 volunteers who visited Kaiser Permanent, which was the place Dr. Felitti was first conducting those small studies in. And all of these were well-insured Americans. Okay, they were middle-class, well-insured, fairly well-to-do Americans who were all visiting those primary health centers for various conditions, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression, and substance use. And what they found, what they did was that when these people visited the primary health centers, they gave them these 10 questions to fill on various forms of traumatic stress in childhood. This could include, have you ever witnessed a parent being sent to jail, for example? Or have you been at the receiving end of neglect? So the Adverse Childhood Experiences study was like, now it has become a proper test or a scale which is freely available in the public domain. And then they took these 10 questions and grouped them into 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and childhood dysfunction or household dysfunction. And those well-insured, middle-aged, well-to-do Americans, among those, 2/3 of them had at least one adverse childhood experience. Very few, okay, just 1/3 actually had 0. And who knows if they were being completely honest or not. But we do know that adverse childhood experiences is something that nobody could neglect anymore because finally there were numbers. Yeah, the world always responds to stats and numbers, right? And these people gave them 17,000 volunteers with proper statistical data. No more could history say that childhood trauma doesn't exist. So the ACE study is not just a landmark study because of the numbers, it's because it's changed the face of public health. To a large extent, today we talk about trauma, we talk about how trauma is linked to various conditions, including suicide, thanks to the work of these two pioneers. What they did find is that individuals with 4 or more ACEs or adverse childhood experiences are more likely to attempt suicide compared to those with none. What this also tells us as clinicians is that every suicide risk assessment that we do cannot just be about that one moment. It's what was spoken about today morning also in various forms by different speakers, that we need to go deeper, we need to go into histories. We need to understand that suicide is never about an event or that moment or the 5 minutes before that action, but the roots go much, much deeper, which is what our workshop today is about. This is the newest ACE pyramid. Earlier, the ACE pyramid started with the adverse childhood experiences, which is the third rung. In the last few years, they have included what Aditi was speaking about, local context and historical trauma, type 3 and type 4 trauma. Okay. These are evidences from recent studies. All of these are freely available in the public domain, and they talk about how adverse childhood experiences or any childhood experience of adversity is linked to suicide. So these are studies that are there in public domain. If you wish to read about them, we'll send you a reference list. All of those are available in the reference list. But they're all saying the same thing, that suicide risk is cumulated. It's not a single event. It's not one moment. And we need to go much, much deeper into hidden histories. So now that we've talked about the adverse childhood experiences, again, those are categories. We can say that this individual went through this event, and that is why perhaps they are more prone to suicide, or they are more prone to, say, heart disease or depression or any other form of mental or physical health condition. But now we want to look at a little deeper look at what happens inside an individual. What is the psychological pathway that leads the person to suicide? If they have gone through an adverse childhood experience, what are the typical forms of emotions that they may feel? So this is a table. First, let's just look at what the ABC of impact might be. This is simply to let you know that all of us have psychological terminology that we give to various things. For example, emotions are called affect. And in people with suicide risk and those with childhood histories of trauma have chronic anxiety, sadness, there's a shift in the emotional baseline. What that basically means is that when you go through a stressor, it's very different from going through a traumatic stressor. Stress and trauma are two different types of conditions. With stress, you can see that the person will go through an adverse experience. There'll be certain types of neurotransmitters or hormones released in their body, and then they return to baseline. But when it comes to traumatic stress, the baseline itself shifts. The person is in a constant state of hyperarousal or anxiety. The baseline is no more what it was. This happens with traumatic stress. That's why we cannot look at a behavior of a person, like say a child who's grown up in a home where there is very high expectation, becomes a people pleaser because that's the thing that kept them safe. And we are so quick to label, oh, that person is a people pleaser, or that person withdraws from social company. We want to look at, and we'll be talking about this very much more in depth in this workshop, that what we see on the outside, the behavior we see will often be adaptations. They won't just be behavior, they won't just be labels. And we need to also, when we think through a trauma lens, we are starting to look at everything the person does as a protective mechanism in some way that goes back to childhood. I'll exemplify this with case studies a little later. Core beliefs also seem to become, when a person has suicide risk and childhood trauma, the core beliefs become around safety and vulnerability a lot more. It is also around shame, such as I'm worthless, but at the core of it will also be I'm not safe. I just don't feel safe. And often in therapeutic settings, that will be the core negative belief we'll be working with those with adverse childhood experiences. And of course, there are body experiences that we carry. The body knows trauma and knows something is happening to it way before the brain can register that that event has happened. And such is true even when the child is an infant. If mama doesn't listen when the child is crying, okay, say the child has pooped or peed, or like kids do all the time, wants something, wants entertainment, wants to be picked up, but mama doesn't pay attention to the child, it's not that he's registering he's unwanted or she's unwanted. What their body is registering is that if I make a sound, if I make my needs known, my body is telling me that's not safe. And that is something that they're going to carry forward into their adulthood, in their 40s and 50s. It might come up in small things like asking for their needs, asking for, okay, can I have that cup of coffee, or can I sit on this chair? Now, these are all pre-verbal, and this is all stored in the body. So when we do trauma work, we say trauma enters the body first, leaves the body last. So if we are not really working with the body, trauma is not going to leave the system, particularly if this has been, if traumatic events have been happening very early in the individual's life, which is more or less the case. So we are going to look at those invisible bridges, like I said, that links all these affect behaviors and the emotions, the thinking patterns and the body sensations, how they would show up in your therapy room. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just, you can say, like a pathway to understanding how suicide risk might be linked to different forms of trauma. Take sexual abuse, for example, the one that's most talked about. Sexual abuse often leads to a feeling of shame and contamination, not only to a feeling of shame, but often to a feeling of shame. We've talked about it so much. There's an entire workshop, I think, going on shame. Irina spoke about it a little in the morning half. They say shame is like a social death. And Brené Brown says that if you put shame in a petri dish and you asked it what are the things that will make shame grow, it is usually secrecy, silence, and isolation. And that's what happens when a person goes through sexual abuse. They feel shame. That's at a body level. The thoughts might be, I am ruined. And what finally leads to a suicidal ideation is because the first thing that came up when Aditi asked was about sexual abuse, right? What is the hidden, what kind of things are hidden in backgrounds? It's shame isolates a person. When there is sexual trauma, the first thing that the person will do is hesitate to tell anyone about it. Sometimes it's told years later. Think of the Me Too movement. When people actually came out, when women actually came out and talked about sexual trauma, that time also they were silenced. They were silenced while it was happening. They were silenced when they spoke about it. And that's the kind of social shame that people with sexual abuse go through. So it prevents disclosure, it prevents help seeking. Finally, there is so much of self-hatred and self-loathing that it might lead to suicidal ideation or even a suicidal act. Physical abuse. What happens when you think of a child being hit? The first thing that happens with a child who's being physically abused is you're taking away their agency. You're taking away their control. Something is being done to them that makes them feel like life is out of control. So there's hyperarousal, fear, struggles with agency. The inner belief is, I can't stop the pain. This is beyond me. What is being done to me is perpetrated on me. I have nowhere to hide. And that's the pathway to suicide, because chronic fear and helplessness lead to that loss of control, loss of agency. Suicide might be the only place they get that control, maybe the only choice that they feel like they have at that point of time. Think about it, how horrible, right? For an individual who's gone through maybe chronic violence in their home while growing up, and then might be also at the receiving end of domestic abuse. That individual is finally left with few choices except one, dying or death. Emotional neglect is like a disconnection and emotional deprivation. The person is constantly going to feel like, because no one has paid attention to me, my needs don't matter, no one is ever going to understand me. And so finally, because they feel so alone, because they don't have attachment to anyone, the profound loneliness is the reason that they go in for a suicide attempt. It's not really because they want to escape life, they want to escape that deep feeling of feeling completely lonely. They may be surrounded by people. As you know, being alone and being lonely are two different things. Loneliness is an emotion. It's a physical and emotional state. And finally, emotional abuse. Emotional abuse leads to identity collapse and internalized blame. It is a sense of, I am the cause of everything. I am at fault. We see this in a lot of survivors of those who grew up in homes of narcissistic abuse. Again, using this term very loosely, but growing up in homes where there's chronic invalidation and a feeling like anything they do, it's their fault. These people feel a sense of so much of self-loathing that finally suicide is a way to escape the voices in their head that are constantly telling them, you're worthless, you're useless, you can't do anything, you have nothing, and you are the problem. If you are the problem, you're going to contaminate other people, so might as well you leave this life. And again, this table is just classifying it, categorizing, but as you can see, none of these are categories. They're all on continuum. And this is just a way to exemplify it and make some sense of how certain emotions can lead to suicide or could be pathways to suicide. Okay. And now that part of the workshop I was talking about, which is how trauma intersects with clinical presentations and suicidality. Many of you must be, how many of you work with clinical presentations in your practice? Let's say OCD, you work, Ashlesha, of course, you work with clinical presentations, you do as well. And I'm talking about things like, which require also medical intervention. Bipolar and OCD are two of them, right? So your group here, you work, personality disorders, yeah. Pardon?
We do the initial counseling and then we move it
To the right person. Most times, most of you are not working with clinical presentations, but it's also important for you to recognize that the minute a clinical presentation comes to you, it doesn't mean that the first place they need to go to as a psychiatrist. They need you to also take history. They need you to understand their histories. And you can be a lot of help to them even if you feel you're so-called not trained. This is one major problem, I think, in our Indian context, where the feeling is, I'm not trained, I can't, these are not conditions I want to work with. No one's saying you really have to do the medical component or actually work with the, let's say, episodes, but you can do a lot of work with their backgrounds and their histories. And many of their histories are replete with trauma. Okay. Aditi, you want to take over and just talk a little about the beaker analogy? This is something which Aditi has created on her own. Yeah.
I'll tell a little bit of history of this. I used to train the volunteers at Connecting Helpline. And one question that the volunteers had often was that now that a caller has called, especially when they're suicidal, many people felt that it's now all on me to save them. So then this image came to me that on the top you see like a brown thing. It's a turbulence, or it's a what's called a presenting problem that somebody comes with. It could be anxiety, depression, relationship issues, work-related issues, anything like that. Not just in the helpline context. Anybody that you work with, say some of you work in school, so someone's, it could even be that someone's not doing well in the exams in class and the teacher refers them to you as a counselor maybe. So that is on the sort of on the surface. Now if you think about the person as a beaker, here like if it were transparent like that, they have the what I've kept as stars. they have resources. This person who called on the suicide helpline also has somewhere saved that number on the phone or found it out, or maybe somebody recommending that they call this line, so they have that support person in their lives. So all of these are resources or stars, as I have depicted here. And they also have, say, neutral experiences, which are not depicted here, and also some form of very difficult or somewhat difficult experiences. So the red and black blobs there. And I don't have the next picture, but if you were to put it on a timeline, like from, say, birth or even before that to now, the different times of life will also have this. Say, somebody who felt like that internal belief that I'm not lovable, nobody loves me, I'm not lovable, might have had a maybe a dog that would, even a street dog that would wag its tail when they walk by. So that is probably an experience of feeling loved, or so even those stars will be there. So when we take history, don't miss out on these things either. As a sort of like so some of the these red and black blobs could be, anyone wants to guess some of them? Some of these you have already mentioned, but say age 10.
Some experiences which were not
Give me an example.
Bullying.
Bullying, yeah. So that could be a thing. And we talked about sexual trauma, right? So, rejection, yeah. So all of it. But we can again keep in mind that such events might have happened. Okay. Yeah. Is that all?
Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly what this next section is about. That we are going to look at 4 conditions: OCD, borderline, bipolar disorder. Again, these are terminologies. I'll exemplify them with cases. It's not like you have to have in-depth knowledge to understand the next section. But exactly as Aditi said.
No, just I've written copy hyphen write. This is inspired by Dr. Sheshadri. I've heard him earlier. So this is copy it, write, or actually modify it the way you want. So feel free to copy.
Yeah, Aditi's original work. But yeah, a great analogy to understand that hidden below what we think of as events on the outside or presenting complaints, there'll be much, much more deeper issues that we need to look at. So, by the way, I'm having such a ball with AI, especially the creation of images, all the newfangled things that I'm learning with that cartoon also, which I made from the ACEs study. So at least for me, slides, are good fun because you can do all this nowadays. So all of these cases that I'll be talking about are not one single incident or one single person, but they are what I call as fictionalized composites, putting together data from all different clients and creating some kind of a story for all of you to exemplify a concept. So this is like, let's call this person Meera, sitting on the right, and she presents with self-harm and suicidal thoughts or suicide attempt. Now, the reason for her most recent suicide attempt was that her boyfriend was not picking up her calls and not answering her and blocked her. And historically, whenever this would happen with other relationships also, let's say the boyfriend would not respond to a call or the boyfriend would not call her at the time she designated, she'd block him, but this time he blocked her. And that led to so much internal chaos that finally she tried and attempted suicide. Now, this was not the first time. She had been through self-harm attempts earlier. She had been hospitalized several times for various forms of self-mutilation. And most of the time, she was seen as a suicide risk or a risk, someone presenting with risk, and immediate crisis intervention was done. And then she was sent back. Her most recent therapist, she's been in the mental health system, let's say 5-6 years by now, and her most recent therapist asked her for the first time, when have you felt this feeling before? And she's referring to when the boyfriend doesn't answer your call or he blocks you, when did you feel this before? And this goes back to Meera's history when as a child, her parents would fight in front of her. She'd witness those fights. Then they'd lock her up in a room and she'd hear them fighting on the outside. And then when they unlocked her and she came out and asked for hug or somebody to support her, or she went to a parent, she was pushed away. If she created too much of a nuisance when the parents were fighting, sometimes she was locked outside the home, sometimes in a room. Most of the time, her body carried that kind of abandonment and a feeling like when something bad is going to happen, people are going to leave me. I'm going to be left. I'm going to be abandoned. And that is what showed up with her history. So most people may call someone like Meera dramatic or manipulative. We want to understand how did their early experiences teach them that pain is the only way to be seen. When she cut herself or when she tried to kill herself, like her last was with an overdose, that was in therapy, she said, the only way maybe somebody would know that I was in pain. As a child also she had learned that one of the ways in which she can express pain to her parents was either by screaming very loudly or by scratching herself or by pulling her hair or various things like that. Histories of these people, of anyone with a condition, will often be a trauma watermark left somewhere in their body, left somewhere in their brain. Our goal as when we are working either as therapists or in institutions or we are working in communities is also to ask this question, simple questions like when has this happened in the past? Simple questions which are only going to help them relieve their pain, not relive it, but relieve it by going back to those pathways, the psychological pathways that were created. Now, this is again something which research finds over and over, and I like to bring in research because, not because it sounds impressive, but also because there is data now, and that data finds information that is pretty much similar across various papers, that is pretty much similar across various countries and cultures. There is a paper, for example, which is by Zanarini in 2020 that finds that 70 to 80% of individuals with BPD show histories of sexual abuse. This was found even in the early 2000s and now they're confirming it even now, so many years later. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse, attachment disruptions, but particularly sexual abuse is very strongly seen in histories of those with borderline personality disorder. Self-injury and suicidal behaviors, we can't really call them as attention-seeking acts, we'll call them as connection acts. They are ways to elicit a reconnection with someone, they are also ways to regulate. For example, when a person cuts, there is a rush of endorphins to that site, and endorphins help us relieve pain, feel good. Right? We feel a rush of happiness, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people have self-injurious behavior that is repetitive, and that's very difficult to help them sort of move away from. And one of the things we see when we are doing a suicide assessment or we are doing a self-harm assessment, we are looking not at removing that self-harm, but we are looking at replacing first healthy behaviors or front-loading them with healthy behaviors so that they learn other ways to regulate themselves. You can't give a person or you can't take away a strategy from a person until you have built a bridge towards another strategy. That's one of the most important things to remember, especially when working with borderline and self-harm. Okay, let's now look at somebody with bipolar disorder. This is again a case of an individual in his early 30s. He presented with a suicide attempt to therapy. Yeah, you want to ask something? Yeah, bipolar.
When you have tried this before and the person answers, but is it straightforward the person can identify?
No, no.
Yeah, it is difficult.
This is very simplified, actually, and it is only meant for you to get an idea what can be asked. The person is not going to make a direct connection immediately, and the therapist also is not going to be able to make the connection immediately. It will happen over time. But the fact is we have to start somewhere. Let's call this a starting point. And I don't completely agree that they may not connect with it immediately. Sometimes a lot of people do connect with it immediately. A simple question that when you feel that abandonment in your body, where do you feel it? Maybe stomach. When is the first time you felt this ever in your life, that you're going to be left alone? And these histories come out. Like I said, a great bridge is the body. But I also agree with you, it's never that straightforward. This is, of course, for educational purpose. So going to now bipolar. This individual presented in his early 30s with a suicide attempt. He left behind 2 children at home with his wife and drove down and planned to jump off a bridge. Now, he was so fed up with the highs and lows that were happening to him. He was not diagnosed with bipolar at that point. He had been diagnosed with depression and was on antidepressants. And at that point of time, he felt so worthless, so useless. Every time he felt like a failure, the thoughts came of suicide. Sometimes it became unbearable, and then he wanted to end his life. Now, when much later in therapy, much later in his mental health journey, was this person finally diagnosed with what we call as bipolar type 2. Not necessary that you need to know these, but bipolar type 2 typically has longer phases of depression and what we call as hypomanic episodes. So this individual was in the mental health system, roaming around for years together, being given everything from a mood stabilizer to an antidepressant, didn't work, 1 or 2 hospitalizations, all that stuff. His symptoms kind of would abate, then would resurge. There would be again, a episode of hypomania, during which time there were all kinds of problems. Like hypomanic episodes, unlike a full-blown manic episode, they are very subtle. It's very difficult to make out that the person is hypomanic. They may do something like, have these ideas that they're going to start a new business, or they may suddenly decide that they want to buy a lot of stuff for their family. They feel very joyous and all of that. And it's very difficult for family and the person to figure out something is happening until some drastic step is taken. Like for this person, he maxed out his credit cards. He almost blew up the entire savings of the family. And it was he who wanted to enter trauma-focused work. So he came in with the idea of wanting to work with his childhood trauma because he somewhere saw the link. Not everybody is like this. Okay, this person was well-read, wanted to figure out more about his life, so he did that. And when the therapist asked him what feels familiar about these swings between the highs and lows, his childhood history revealed, for example, that he grew up in a home of chronic invalidation. Father was this grandiose individual who would borrow a lot of money. He would borrow money, then the family would go through debts, and then the mother was the one who had to look after the creditors. So the creditors would come knocking on the door, and this little kid, that is the client, would be watching his mother deal with the creditors, have to beg with them, have to cry. So, and his father would then act like nothing has happened. He'd go back to his grandiosity, borrow some more money, put the family in more distress, and this cycle would continue. And what he found was that when he had these manic episodes or hypomanic episodes, the trigger for that would usually times when he felt very worthless, when he felt like he was not contributing anything to society or to his work or to his home. And that's when, as a coping mechanism, he'd go for this extra buying or, trying to feel happy, trying to overdo things. Then as that hypomanic episode came down and he was at the tail end, then he would say, I'm just like my dad. I'm going to do the same thing to my family that my dad did. And then he'd go launch into a depressive episode, which would last for a long period of time. Now, when this link is discovered, magic doesn't happen. It's not like, oh, you discover this link and the bipolar is going to vanish on its own. But what does happen when you really work with the trauma is that the person is able to identify what we call as prodromes. He's able to identify the triggers way, way before the episode strikes and is able to know, okay, this is a reminder of my experiences in childhood. I need to be careful. My body needs to be careful. They are more aware about what are the pathways that can lead them to those episodes. What also happens is in cases of bipolar where the trauma has been worked with that I see, they are able to adhere to medication better, so they are able to actually respond better to the interventions. The other thing that I see with them is they develop I don't know what to call, a sense of meaning to life. Otherwise, with conditions like these conditions become the center of that individual's life. Their life becomes dictated by the medication, the visits to the doctor, planning when an episode happens or doesn't happen, anticipating the next episode. There's very little when it comes to meaning. When we work with trauma histories, the person not just regulates themselves better during episodes, but also finds meaning. And for example, finding a job that gives them satisfaction rather than doing something which they were told to do, or finding meaning in a spouse or a partner, being able to relate better to their children, being able to give back to society and advocate. There are so many changes that we see that do happen when they are able to reduce the burden or work with the burden of the past. So that's again something which research finds over and over. Trauma-informed work will link mood surges to old survival states and not just label them as instability. Again, if we look at what research finds, manic highs can be an escape from pain, and a depressive crash can be a collapse into shame and helplessness, as we saw with that young person who presented for therapy. And individuals with bipolar disorder who attempt suicide will also have higher childhood trauma. Now, this individual, and if I borrow from composite cases, most of the people that I see with histories of, when we look at their histories with bipolar disorder, there's a lot of shaming, bullying. Their histories will be replete with some form of abuse, either physical or sexual abuse. And it's sad that for a long time our mental health system was blind to this. It's only in recent times that this has become that. Trying to see the link between clinical conditions, suicide, and trauma is just so very recent. So I hope many of you sitting here, that spark of interest comes in probably trying to do a little more research in this area. Let's move to the next condition, which is OCD. I feel like this is a condition we talk about so loosely, isn't it? Everything is OCD. I want to move this phone here, from here to here. Oh, I have OCD tendencies. We all know it's not, it goes deeper than that, it's a condition. All of us sitting here are informed in some way about this being a really difficult clinical condition. What many of us don't know is that people with OCD do have strong trauma underlying conditions. Earlier, maybe about 10 years ago, we had only a few smattering of papers that were seeing this link. Now, in the last 5 or 7 years, we are seeing a very strong link between OCD and traumatic stress, histories of trauma with people with OCD. So let's take the case of this young lady, a young mother who presented to therapy with what was termed as loosely postpartum depression. Okay, so when nobody can understand what to do with a lady, they'll say it's either menopause or it's postpartum depression, or you're having a mood swing. PMS, yes. I sometimes, and a lot of women who come to me for work will actually have been fed this so often that they say, this is all because of PMS. This is all because my hormones are haywire. They have literally swallowed that entire thing, internalized it, and believed it about themselves, and not even willing to see any other reason for what they feel. So this person also presented with postpartum depression. The signs were not there. It was very clearly signs of obsessive compulsive disorder, to the extent that she would wash her infant's hand several times, thinking the infant has touched things, and she would wash her hand. She had very, very strict rituals for the maids and any helper who was in the home. All the people in the house had to follow a ritual every morning with the infant. And if any one step of that ritual was missed, they had to restart the entire thing from beginning. And the whole family had to do this. It's not just her. All the helpers, all the people in the family, it was like a given. And she was very methodical. So she had lists, and she had charts, and she had diagrams about how the baby's milk bottles were to be boiled, and all of that. She had like a proper plan. And she did not think any of this was wrong. She just believed this had to be done. Now, typically, when a person presents with these kind of contamination phobias, very few people will go into the history, very few professionals will go into the history. This person had also roamed in the mental health system for a few months, thankfully then arrived at working with someone who asked her about her childhood. Now, the link with the childhood was again startling for her, startling for the therapist also. She was asked, when is the first time you felt something is out of order? When did you feel disturbed about things being out of order? So she talked back to her childhood and she said, I used to keep my pencil box neat and straight. All my books were lined in height-wise order, or everything was properly labeled and all of that. And I was a very good student and this and that. So to answer your question, this is the kind of responses most people will give initially. They're going to say, oh, you know what, my symptom ties to that trauma there. They're going to say that. But we have to dig and figure out. Then if some more questions are asked, she said that she grew up in a home where she was the elder sister and the little brother was born several years after her. And like she said, मेरी माँ ने बहुत मिन्नत किया, उसके बाद घर पे भाई आया और बहुत सारे miscarriages के बाद भाई आया. So the boy was, what can you say, kept like a chandi ka tukda at home, like like a little doll. And there's something about families where this boy was, of course, favored, but at the same time, this girl was made his primary caregiver. So if the parents went out of the house or the mother was overwhelmed with work, it was this 9-year-old who would manage the little baby brother. And of course, she was interested in studies. She was a good student. She wanted to pay attention to her classwork, but she also had to manage baby brother alongside. So once or twice, baby brother fell down, had an accident, cut his head. He had 2-3 such mishaps. But each time a mishap like that happened, there was a lot of emotional and physical abuse that she went through as a result. She was told she was useless. She was told that she can't do anything right. And then when she started piecing together, that's when putting the books in order and sharpening the pencils to a certain point only, writing everything in straight, neat lines, that started then. It wasn't there before. And every time she felt like something is going to go wrong with my little brother, I have to be vigilant, I have to be vigilant, that vigilance then generalized to other things also. She became vigilant about schoolwork, she became vigilant about dressing, and she was quite vigilant as an adolescent also. But now the birth of a baby, imagine, an infant is going to be a immediate hark back to the little baby brother who she felt like she might harm in some way. So everything has to be in order. When things are in order, life is in order, damage will not happen, things will not go haywire. This is the inner working of this individual. Does it happen can we get to this inner working in 1 week or 2 weeks? No. In 1 session or 2 sessions? No. It takes several sessions to reach here. But is it worth it? It's 100% worth it. So that's why OCD rituals often defend against re-traumatization, with suicide risk emerging from exhaustion with control, not a wish to die. So let's take this young lady's case. She attempted suicide 2 or 3 times. Once as an adolescent, when she felt like things are so out of order, she's not going to get good marks. How much ever she's trying, she's not able to study well. She also attempted suicide or would think of suicide when she felt like something is going to happen to her baby. Okay? Either if he falls sick and she felt like the doctor can't find a reason for it, then something will go wrong. So she would have suicidal thoughts and she had 1 suicide attempt. But most of these are because when histories are taken or when emotional pathways are discovered, psychological pathways are discovered, they say they are exhausted, people with OCD. They just can't keep up. The routines are too much. If you take care of one thing, something else will pop up. And finally, the suicide is, or the reason for suicidality is because they are exhausted. Research again finds a lot of abuse and neglect. There is a paper written by Raya et al. As recent as last year, 2024, which says that 70 to 75% of individuals with OCD show some form of abuse or neglect. So this is not fiction. This is not something we are imagining in our mind. They're finding it in research. And obsessions will often echo trauma themes, like an intrusive thought can be about, say, harm or contamination or guilt, will often be linked back to some kind of childhood event. It will be a symbolic replay of that. And a compulsion comes as a safety behavior. Now, again, a disclaimer here. It's not like we will do trauma work and magically the OCD will disappear. Let's not go down that path at all. What does happen though with people with OCD is that they are able to delay the rituals a little more. They are able to see things a little more mindfully and not get that angry if somebody else doesn't do the ritual exactly as they want it to be. The obsessions also lose their power or control. It's not like the obsessions go away. The medication and the therapy and the trauma work is in some way going to reduce the hold that that obsession has over the individual, which is that if you don't do this ritual right now, something catastrophic or horrible will happen. The obsession loses its power, the ritual can be delayed, and the individual does not feel that much high anxiety when they don't do the ritual exactly as it should happen. This is the realistic picture that comes in when you work with somebody with OCD with childhood trauma and they are under the right kind of medication with a psychiatrist. It's like you're working with as a team and as an interdisciplinary team. So I just wanted to put that out there so people don't go back thinking, trauma work is magical. It is, but we also have to be realistic what we are going to see with these clinical conditions. Okay, over to Aditi. She's going to talk to us about dissociative disorders.
You gave it away. Oh, it's already there on the slide. Okay. Otherwise, I was going to ask the psychology students, what do you see in this as a disorder? But yeah, and those who are trained in helplines, you remember that lecture that the special psychiatrist would come and give about all the conditions associated with suicide. Here, we are only taking a few such conditions and sort of spending some time with them, but basically looking at the trauma through the trauma lens. So, I'll start with the case actually. This is again a composite case. Early 20s student in a dental college came saying that I have this, I see like a younger girl telling me to cut myself. And of course they have access to tools like that in the college. And when she came home over the weekend, the parents will remove all the knives and things like that. But when she went back to the college, she had access to these things, and they were like cutting marks and all happening. And she would say that I would be working on this model of the tooth thingy, and suddenly I'll sort of like wake up and see that I'm ready to cut myself. So she is actually carving the teeth, like the model of the teeth. So we slowly, this is referred, this is originally diagnosed, this person was originally diagnosed as having a schizophrenia and treated at a tertiary mental health center. She and the family underwent some family therapy, but then the symptoms were not continuing. So they took further referrals, and this came through a psychiatrist for trauma work to me and this person. So this is almost, it looked like a hallucination, like a younger person sitting in front of me and younger girl telling me to cut myself. And then when I explored what is it that you want, she said, okay, I haven't slept for 15 years. I actually want to sleep. So the connection there is she also had a nightmare of almost being sexually assaulted. And then she'll wake up with that. So every night her sleep was disrupted. So that was the focus of our work, like how to help her to be uh, able to sleep. So going back, so when I explored, in addition to this sort of like this hallucination that will tell her to harm herself, there were other voices or even like older people telling her to harm herself as well. And then taking history, there was also the history of I think, as somebody mentioned earlier, parents who had a mental condition but not treated. So her background was that the mother had such a condition, and then would a lot of put downs and including some physical violence towards a child from the time that she was really young. So and so to how does an organism like a child cope with many of the things that happened in childhood? One of the ways that is seen is to sort of divide or compartmentalize these experiences. So, say the mother's put down can then become like a part of the personality that continues to say those things. There could be like a traumatic experience that again stuck in trauma time, as we call it, and getting activated when there are certain triggers from outside. So if there are like big barriers, like how we see between the fingers here, they might look very different and different personalities, but overall we know they're all part of one person. Okay? But these different parts could work against one another. Sometimes might have be seen as having different goals in life. One might be a go-getter with a whole big list of things to do every day, but another might be a very tired, I don't want to do anything kind of a side. And all of this could be in one person. And now, because we talked about shame earlier, there could be these very strong criticizing parts, and the parts that receive it and feeling intense shame or intense pain, feeling I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, and the cognitive triangle of like worthlessness, helplessness, that is lack of control of sorts, and hopelessness. So it could all be in sort of compartmentalized. I'm sort of giving a very simplified or sort of like a composite kind of thing presentation here. So yeah. So when there is this big barriers between parts, that's when it's called dissociative identity disorder. But there are other forms of dissociative disorder as well, which could be connected to suicide actions or ideation. So yeah, we are not talking about treatment right now because that is like a broader topic. So next slide. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so a little bit of research. I was inspired by how we solved the slide. So again, the connection with dissociative disorders. And this topic usually the psychiatrists wouldn't talk about when they come for that lecture on suicidal behavior, because the condition itself is very rarely diagnosed. Though, even though DID has the same prevalence as schizophrenia, which is 1% in the population, but this is not very often diagnosed. So even voice hearing and some of those symptoms, like in hallucination in this case, are associated usually with psychosis or schizophrenia, but they're seen to be, now there's more evidence to show that they're more there in dissociative disorders. So some people will hear child voices, which could actually be the experience that is compartmentalized of an earlier experience. But it is now, when it is heard that, oh, the child, like a voice, it's seen as a voice, then it gets very quickly diagnosed as something else, like psychosis or schizophrenia. Okay. Anything else I need to add here? So, yeah, that's it.
So, just this slide is only to let you all know that these conditions we've talked about is just like an illustrative or exemplified list of how suicide and clinical presentations might interact, especially when there is hidden histories of trauma or when there are hidden histories of trauma. So it's not an exhaustive list. This was just a way for us to kind of introduce to the audience to look deeper into histories and how they could do that. What are some of the questions that they could ask? So trauma intersects with many clinical presentations, and the reason we added dissociative disorders is because it's not talked about. We do talk about OCD, we do talk about borderline, BPD, we do talk about bipolar. We don't really talk about dissociation. So we wanted to just bring that little piece in also. And our goal today is to notice how trauma may underlie symptoms, regulation, and suicide risk. That might be something which gets missed out very often in clinical histories, in hospitals. My niece is currently or just passed out from MPhil, and she was also telling me that the case histories that she has to take are all so very clinical, and there is very little trauma work or anyone asking about childhood experiences in any of these case history forms. So I feel systemically also there has to be such a big change to the way we approach an individual, the way we are looking at them. And I really liked the systemic approach that was taken in the morning also, where we're not just looking at, of course, our workshop today is about what's happening within the individual, but also how the individual operates in systems, in the mental health system, in the academic system, social system, familial system. All of these make a big difference. So when we are looking at a person, a trauma-informed lens is not about what happened to this person, or rather is about what happened to this person, and not just what happened to them in terms of an event, but also how everything around them, their ecosystem, contributed to where they are. We're looking at all the forms of trauma. We are looking at adverse childhood experiences and what lies below that, intergenerational patterns. Take an example of how an intergenerational pattern shows up for somebody that you meet in the therapy room. Let's say this individual has grown up in the partition. He has never witnessed, or she has never witnessed the partition. The grandparents and parents carried stories of that. But how an intergenerational pattern will show up with you in a clinical practice is that the person may feel insecure and doesn't know why they feel insecure. It's not like they have themselves gone through that trauma, but they have heard it. They have captured the insecurities they've seen in their familial environment, and that is what intergenerational trauma is. It's not only about epigenetics, but it is also about what we absorb from the environment. So I just wanted to put that out there. And next is, because we don't have time, I'm just going to go through this. We'll now look at the trauma-informed suicide risk response. What do we do? How do we approach an individual, and what kind of a response do we give them? So a traditional frame of looking at a suicide risk response is usually a risk level frame. That is, how risky is this individual? Almost like we are looking at them as a thermometer or barometer. A trauma-informed pain is usually about how much pain is this person carrying. Not how risky is this individual, but how much pain are they carrying. And remember that both these work together. A prevention approach and a trauma-informed approach are not going to be working in different dabbas. They are not like put into different compartments. They work together. For example, risk management approaches might be something like, do you have a plan? A safety and regulation, which is a trauma-informed approach that works alongside, might just ask them to help the body get settled down. A risk or a prevention approach might focus on lethality. What are you going to do, and what are the means you have to do it, and how strong is the urge to harm yourself? A trauma-informed approach will focus on the state. What is the person feeling at this point of time? Where did this pain come from? Are they feeling shame or overwhelm? Again, like I tell you, it's not either or. We are looking at these as working together. When we are looking at a preventive approach, we are looking at managing behavior. We often have these crisis plans, or we make clients sign out sometimes safety plans. And I find that even if I do a safety plan or ask them to sign that, it doesn't guarantee they will not do anything. But instead, if there is a restoring of agency, asking them, for example, you have a plan, let me see how you're going to help yourself tonight. What's going to happen? What are the steps that you can take? Help them get control back. Containment is again a preventive approach, very helpful, because you obviously have heard of suicide watches. Everybody is going to look at somebody who has presented with a suicidal ideation as a risk and going to keep them somewhere visible so that they are seen. But actually what they might need at that point is a simple question in terms of, let's take it one moment at a time, I'm here with you. And which is why, as Raj Mariwala said in the morning, a preventive approach is great. And especially when a crisis happens, it's the factor that is a deciding factor between, say, life and death. But beyond that, there is a larger story. And that story has to be of connection. That where connection has been, say, broken in the individual's system, our goal as a mental health system or our goal as a community is to restore that connection. So trauma-informed suicide care is about first regulation, which Aditi is going to be talking about right now, starting with grounding, breath work, body-based stabilization, moving to connection, giving the person an ability to feel like they belong, because suicide is often the last step that they go through in terms of feeling like they're disconnected to themselves and disconnected with others. And the final goal of, I think, any trauma-informed suicide care is meaning making. And I touched on that a little bit. That's one of the things that I would watch for as a professional, that is the client sitting in front of me able to make meaning of their life. It's not just that they are regulated, it's not just that they have forms of connection, but do they look at life differently? And if they don't, then we need to work a little harder with them to make sure they're able to restore hope and not just agency. So now just going back to co-regulation, which is the groundwork of most suicide prevention through a trauma lens also. So Aditi is going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Havabi. Yeah, I'll take the clicker. Okay. Anybody familiar with this model of what's called the window of tolerance? Yeah, okay, good, some of you. So now we talked about the organism, right? And we know that when somebody is thinking about taking their lives, they are at finding something intolerable. So it could be what's happening outside. Maybe there's too much pressure about academics. It could also be something that's happening inside. There's a lot of self-blaming and shame is emerging, or guilt is emerging, as someone said. And that experience becoming slowly or over time intolerable. So, like we all know about tolerance for pain. Right? Some people, even mosquito biting can be very painful. But some people cut and bleeding, it's still tolerable. Yeah. So similarly, we have different tolerance limits for different emotions or different experiences. So sadness. We all have varying amounts of tolerance for sadness. Some feeling lonely. Some of us can maybe take a book and read when we are feeling lonely, or call a friend, or in someone else, it could become something like harming themselves because it's too intolerable. So, how in the context of suicide prevention, one way that we can help ourselves, I know we have experiences here as well, and also someone else could be to help increase the window of tolerance for different experiences. Are you all with me? Okay. I ran away from biology, learning biology, and took first whatever math and learned, and then I switched to psychology at some point, and now as a psychotherapist, I'm incorporating the neurobiology. So if there are missing pieces, that's why. So let's look at, one other important thing is even an emotion like happiness, we have windows. Some people say, can get bodily dysregulated when they're happy because things like messages from early on, like don't get too happy, you'll have to cry tomorrow, might come in and interfere. So just increasing the this window. Okay. Now, what happens when there is intolerance? Okay. One could go into hyper-aroused state. Like say, think about fear. When it becomes too much, or the anxiety, it sort of grows, and then we can't sit in one place. There's too much of energy. We're walking up and down, or lots of thoughts are going round and round. So that could be the upper side of the window of tolerance. Yeah. Another thing that could happen is going into the lower zone, like low energy, no energy to get up in the morning. In me, I've noticed I talk with my hands, so sometimes the hands don't want to talk. Then I realize I also don't want to talk. So these are signs we can sort of pick up, depending for ourselves also and for our the person sitting in front of me. Like, what are their signs? How do we know, or how can we help them know what these signs are? Like how we said that it's just like a slow progression. So we can, if we catch these signs early, then we can use some capacity to regulate the emotion so it doesn't spill over. It doesn't reach that place where it becomes intolerable. So that is the significance of this window. You can please scan this for more resources that Hawaii has put out on window of tolerance. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. It's going somewhere? It's only one, this picture only? Or this picture only? Or same picture? Okay. Yeah. So, and if you search, there are lots of WOT pictures that will appear with your search engine. Now, what are these cues of hyperarousal? So, speech becoming rapid, sometimes interrupting themselves and talk, body can be tense, some people might sweat because that high energy, and maybe a lot of thinking activity that could also be indicative of that. What if the bus becomes late tomorrow? And what if I don't reach on time? So those kinds of things. And then some people might even ask, okay, am I really going crazy? Like one part of me wants to do this. Sorry, I'll come back from parts language, but it might feel as if like too much is going on. Okay. So emotional flooding, somebody might be talking about something, feeling angry, and then feeling tears might come down at the same time. Yeah, and panic. So and then hypoarousal. So that's the lower side of the window. That might look like, sort of like not wanting to talk, the speech sort of slowing down, voice going down, body slumping, dissociation. It's almost like some zoning out might happen. And emotional flatness, numbness. People might even report that my legs are heavy, or I can't sense my hand anymore, or things like that. Yeah. And Deb Dana Some of this is from her work. Another person to look out for is Stephen Porges, Stephen spelling, and then Porges, and his work on polyvagal theory. Okay, so now how do we support someone? Alan Shore has done a lot of work on this. So we, as we sitting with someone, how can we, as helpers, help somebody to increase their window of tolerance? Or coming backwards, one way could be to create a space for that intolerable emotion to be tolerated better. There are many ways of doing it. One is even to hold the space where we together are creating a vessel for that intolerable emotion. So sometimes grief, as we sit together and work with it, it might feel like alone one can't tolerate. Somebody might start talking about a loss and then they might go off to talk about something else. That's an indication that it's too much. But when we are sitting and we are consciously or unconsciously allowing our body and mind also to be attuned, then we can hold that emotion almost like as a bigger vessel. So there's bigger space to hold that grief or any other emotion like that. So in that context, So in that context, it is true that our nervous system and another person's nervous system sort of co-regulates. Okay? But to start with, if we are a helper, we might want to learn something to help our own nervous system to come into the window of tolerance. Okay? Is that okay if we did tried a few methods? One to come from the hyperarousal into the window. Thank you. Yeah, and the hypoarousal into the window. Okay, hyperarousal. Do you know how to help somebody to come from a highly anxious state, agitated state to come in? Can you say some?
Five senses.
Tell us more.
Five senses. Like five senses, five things that you can see, four that you can maybe hear, or three things that you can feel.
Yeah, thank you. Acha. Okay, so today we are supposed to demonstrate. Okay, so one second. So just because I have less time, you're of course invited to share with us later on if you have like a link and all that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm managing time in my head, and otherwise I'd be really happy for everyone to share your resources, because I know many of you have resources that you use, you teach other people. Many of you would have done something called progressive muscle relaxation. Yeah, many not. So basically, or shavasana in yoga. So that is one way, or that kind of muscle relaxations, one way to help somebody to come into the middle of the window from a hyper-aroused state. Or regulating the breathing. If the breathing is going up and down, then to sort of slow down our breathing so they can also slow down. I often ask people to sit back onto take back rest from the back of the chair. So there's some support from there that can help regulate. And one more thing that's helpful. Frontal brain. Will you want to come? Or show? Yeah. Hold the front part of the brain, that is, with the forebrain, and the back. So this back hand, you slide it up till it gets stuck at the base of the skull. And imagine that it is going and supporting your brain stem. So these are two important parts of the brain, the frontal brain that keeps thinking and the seat of sort of the fear, which is the brain stem. So this brain hold. And as some of you are doing it, also notice how what is changing. Not too much pressure, just hold. Just hold, yeah. I invite you to try if you would like. Otherwise, you can just observe. Yeah? Yeah? Thanks, Vijay. Yeah. So, how does it help? So, the frontal part of the brain, if we think about the brain model, this Dan Siegel has shown that, okay, this, if you use the hand, this frontal part of the brain, which is the more evolved thinking, decision-making, reasoning kind of brain, when there is a threat, it can go offline. And then it's the middle part of the brain and the brainstem area that is active, which are more, the brainstem is more the survival part of the brain. So when the threat is high, if we let the reasoning part of the brain to take control, it might take a long while before we decide that, oh, is this a snake or is this a rope? Should I shine it light and show whether it's got scales that will shine? By the time the snake would have bit us and maybe we would die. So instead, the survival brain, which can take quick decisions, takes over and takes control. And when we support the brain like this, their activities, the brain gets supported. I told you already not to ask me brain questions, so anyway, I'm trying to answer this in my way. So they can basically calm down. Yeah, simple answer. Convinced? Okay. So, so you know how to get from a agitated state many ways now. Relaxation, muscle relaxation. Another one could be doing a sigh. Let's do a sigh. How does that feel? Nice? Okay. Let's also do a similar thing called elongated out breath. That is, take a breath in and do slow out breath as if you're blowing through a straw. Like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you can even do it with a sound. Say, take another breath and let's do it with a sound, ooh sound. Ooh. It sounds very eerie. But these are, again, brain biology based. I would invite you to look up polyvagal. Yeah. Polyvagal theory and where these methods have come from. And now let's do from the hypoarousal zone to a, only 2 minutes. Oh no, okay. We have kept 15 minutes for you to ask questions, so that's what the bell is about. So from down to middle. So as I said, as I've noticed myself, my hands won't want to talk, voice will go down, I don't really want to talk. So somebody might report that they're feeling tired. Suddenly they're feeling tired sometimes. So as we notice that they're going into this, it is because the window overflown. So capacity is not there for that emotion. But we don't want them to really go into a very shut down state, which could be, the worst of which could be fainting. Yeah, so to help them to sort of come back, yeah, one thing we can do is to, wherever their hand is, usually on the lap, I would say, just move the fingers very slowly. Yeah, wherever your hands are, just try moving your fingers. Both hands' fingers you can move very slowly. As I did this, immediately I could take a bigger breath. Any change you notice? Similarly, do your toes. Okay? Just very slowly moving your toes inside your shoes. That's fine. And slowly rotating your hand around your wrist, very slowly, gently. Imagine we are doing this when the person is going to a shutdown, low energy kind of state. And similarly, the ankles very slowly in one direction and another direction. Okay. And again, slow movement of maybe the yeah, the shoulders, the joint, including the elbow, the wrist. I remember teaching this to someone, and that girl said, some days depressed, some days when I couldn't get up from the bed, I did it in the bed itself. Like I would slowly move my toes, foot around the ankle, and then I could get up. So you learned, okay, some of it. Now, one more thing could be, again going to invite you. So very slowly and gently moving your face to one side. Yeah, hand you don't need to keep, I'm just showing. And just look, see the things around. Okay? You're just moving the neck and coming back to the center. This has got two reasons. Okay? One is we all played some form of chore police, hide and seek. So when we are hiding and don't want to be caught, we stiffen that neck muscle and the rest of the body out of fear of being caught. So fear again, if that is one emotion that's made things intolerable, the slow moving of the neck sort of unlocks that muscle, and also as a side effect, the fear comes down. Another reason is that as we orient, we are more orienting to the present, like I maybe as an adult today, whereas I might have been gone out of the window of tolerance because I'm thinking or I'm experiencing some difficulty from the past, or imagining something bad happening in the future, and that emotion of fear or sadness or shame has become too much. So these are some simple ways, at least two to each, from up to middle and lower to middle, right? Okay. Now, so co-regulation, as we learn this and practice it ourselves to come back to our into the window, these are methods we can also help someone else to come into their window. So we are sitting with them and helping to co-regulate, including, say, holding an emotion of grief as they're talking about their loss, because our bodies and emotions are sort of together holding space for it. I don't know, does it make sense? I'll tell you, when I learned somatic therapy, one of the exercises was to just notice what's happening in the body. Okay? And we'll check with the speaker of sorts later on what was happening in theirs. And one person said that, oh, I can feel electricity. I could feel electricity moving in my fingers as I was supporting my heart with one hand. The other hand, I could feel these sensations. And I was like, that's exactly feeling I had just a few minutes ago in my body. Oh my God, my body and theirs is sort of in sync or resonating. So that is the picture of sort of like a co-regulation happening there. So again, consciously or unconsciously, it's already happening. Like we see the heroine cry in the movie, we are also sort of experiencing that ourselves, right? Sort of similar. Now, is that enough about co-regulation? What is it? Time? Yeah, I know the time. So oh yeah, I'll quickly go through it. Yeah. Okay, so this is very basic thing we can all learn and practice. So now this workshop is also meant to help you be aware of more things that can be done to heal trauma. We'll talk a little bit about the different therapeutic modalities. Yeah, therapeutic modalities. These are only some examples, very few that we are listing. One is called EMDR, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Relatively new, only about 35 years old, but very effective for trauma healing. And it basically holds an experience in our awareness and say the therapist guides a person to move the eyes in a particular way, and it seems to kickstart a healing process. So, say a bullying experience, we ask, okay, what's a visual that represents the memory? What are you feeling as emotions? What are your body sensations? What are you saying about yourself? Like the cognitions that we saw. So, bully must have called this person stupid. So, the belief when that memory comes now could be, I am stupid. So holding all this together and moving the eyes in a particular way, guided by the therapist, is sort of the like a very, very basic gist of the method. And similarly, different traumatic memories, when they're addressed like that, there could be a major change in, say, something like anxiety or chronic sadness and things like that. Internal family system believes that everybody has parts, say a child part, there is say parts that are holding trauma experiences, even though it may not be full memories, but there could be emotions and sensations that are held by parts. Say child part, again, say a child part. Then there are parts that prevent in the suicide prevention space. Again, many methods, and these are just a glimpse. Okay, yeah, so we can take questions. This is a summary slide, and
This is just summarizing everything, but it's a good time for us to take questions if anyone has. Yeah, go ahead. I think we need to pass a mic. This one? Aditi?
Let's take bipolar or OCD. Of every 1 lakh people who actually have bipolar, how many show up to any counselor? And of any number of people that show up, how many actually get better? Aditi, if you remember, Indrajit used to take training, and he runs an addiction center, and he used to say, there is a 97% relapse.
Yes.
That is why I'm so rich. That's what he used to joke. It was just a joke. So, if you're not too poor with maths, if you could give us the numbers.
I don't have the numbers, but there definitely is a big dropout rate. And I think the problem is not in their wanting to continue with therapy, but perhaps the way it is offered to them. And with any of these mental health conditions, particularly the ones that are labeled biochemical, there is such a, the mental health system believes that it is the psychiatrist's job. And the psychiatrist is, I think they are overwhelmed with the fact that there is too much emerging and they're not able to manage it with the medication. But we do not have enough trained psychotherapists who can handle someone with this condition or these set of conditions. And if they do, they are doing more behavior work. I think the issue is not so much that they may not stay on. The issue is how much help are they getting. There is enough evidence to show, I don't know if there is in the Indian context, but there's a lot of dropout. And there is a lot of poor medication adherence also. Relapses are too many because a preventive approach is not taken. So today, as we spoke about, that's more a preventive approach. I think we are starting now in India to even understand what is therapy. We are in a place where we are, I think because of the lockdown and because of COVID, we have finally come to a place where there is accessibility also of therapy, online sessions. We still are young in terms of that. So whether these conditions are going to get help or not, at this point, no. At this point, the dropout rate is very high. And there is a lot of mess up in the mental health system, for sure. You had a second question also?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something. This disclaimer I wanted to say in the beginning. In the morning and even yesterday's panel, we looked at a lot of like how not just this micro level work that a therapist and the person with a condition of sorts working together is enough or not enough. We are broadening our views as to systemic changes, community work, all that. But still, this work is also important. So this workshop, it is meant for all mental health workers or those interested in understanding the link between trauma and suicidality. But we are talking in the treatment part of it more in, it doesn't have to be individual, but this very micro level or intrapersonal work. So some of the tables that you saw, what's going on inside of the person, and can that be addressed? That is still very important.
Should I take someone else's question
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then come back? Yeah.
So mine is also a reflection and perhaps addresses that point a little bit. You both have been wonderful, and I must say, very nice, nicely avoidant of the role that psychiatrists have to play. And I'm a psychiatrist myself, so I can unfortunately speak for all the other psychiatrists, or say how limiting the training is, and I can agree with you. What I also think we missed perhaps in addressing in the beginning in terms of the invisible trauma that the mental health profession themselves is doing to the clients, by, I think, not getting trained, not recognizing the role they're playing, by perhaps just treating them biologically and not including. All that is traumatic as well. And the amount of people you all must be seeing, I see, we all see of, especially in India, where they're now starting to say, okay, I want help. And then they go and see someone who not only doesn't help them, but also ends up causing trauma. So they're less likely to come back to you. They're less likely to go to anyone. And so I definitely think that, of course, systemically, a lot of things have to change, but even at the tertiary level, a lot of changes have to come. So I'm so glad you guys are doing this, and I don't know how many psychiatrists are in the room. I doubt if there are as many as there should be. I think there should be more. So that was just an observation, and I do hope, and this is also a question to you guys, that how much resistance do you get when you talk about training people who think they know already everything? The kind of stuff you're talking about is trauma-informed. And to be fair to the traditional mental health training, there is language that they've forgotten. It exists in that training. It's all there, but they just don't talk about it anymore because they're, like you said, too busy. So it's not like it doesn't exist. It exists, but they've forgotten. So one of the questions I had was, how much resistance do you face from people who claim to be experts but have kind of forgotten?
Quite a lot, I think. Yeah. I think systemically also, there is a need to get the most important things taught, and then those only go back into the field, not realizing that that is part of only training. There has to be much more than that. So a lot of times I think the issue is that upkeep of training, or going back into the field and constantly updating yourself is really, really missing. What are reasons for that? Lack of availability of training, paisa. The training nowadays are too expensive for an early career therapist. But I agree with you completely that it's the mental health system that traumatizes clients a lot. It's not a talked about thing, obviously, because, but it's definitely there, must be addressed, and has to be addressed at the education level and then later, post that. How it is done, firstly, let us get regulation. We are not even regulated, right? Our profession doesn't even have a name or an identity. So let's begin there, and then maybe, go forward.
Sorry, we've been told to close, but before that, I just want to talk about, it's not just the classroom trainings that we undergo during our master's or MPhil or other courses, the ongoing supervision, other support, like how we and I have been in supervision groups now for like more than 15 years. So, and now we are also like doing training, like taking it forward. So you are also invited to maybe look up ISSTD, International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. We have just started a course this year here in India, and affordable rates, and many other right now in trauma-related workshops and all happening. But and there's a course in TIS, there's a couple of courses in TIS on trauma-focused therapy and trauma-informed care. Hopefully, there'll be more organizations starting trauma-related work and trainings and supervisions ongoing, so that we can be like our own supportive community ourselves, and without the barriers of psychiatrists, psychologists, other social work and counselor kind of divides. Okay.
So thank you, everyone.